Hi everybody, I have with me today Münecat, or is it Mooncat or Münecat?
Mooncat.
Mooncat,
Yeah.
okay, like a cat of the moon, two of my favorite things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Mooncat is a content creator, musician, and pseudoscience debunker. Recently she made a video, I debunked evolutionary psychology, which I will link in the description box of this video. She always does these debunking videos that are very well researched, very scientifically rigorous, and just silly. I feel like you do a great job of being entertaining with them also. So definitely check her out if you're not already familiar with her. And thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Um, so to start off with, I'm curious how you got into these massive debunking videos in the first place. Like, do you have a spidey sense that kind of crops up when you get the sense that someone's being intellectually deceptive, or how do you initially go into those early stages?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just do get a sort of like sus- suspicious feeling about a lot of things. Yeah, like I don't know whether it's a spidey sense or what, but like yeah, I don't know. I guess I just follow my curiosity wherever it takes me, I suppose. And with evolutionary psychology, I think like a couple of my past videos had touched on it, especially the manosphere and especially the body language video that I did. Those
Mm-hmm.
two, because they really go, they really delve into psychology and they use that sort of science to back up their theories, and it always comes down to when it at the core it's always down to, well, it's evolutionary psychology because you've got to sort of have a way to say that people are wired a certain way.
Yeah,
um yeah, so I was just like really curious about that. I just really wanted to get down to the core of that. So yeah, I guess it's just my curiosity in general, because like I'm also interested in like scams as well and how scams work, but like that always comes down to like the psychology of that as well,
mm-hmm.
and like why people do them, but also like why people fall for them so much as well. So yeah, it's very
Yeah,
interesting to me. Like, not that I've ever studied psychology or anything, but it's always been a bit of an interest for me. So yeah.
yeah. I agree. I feel like evolutionary psychology is so often used to explain and justify like a number of different things. It's just kind of an easy crutch to lean on because we don't really have a way to verify if it's true or not. I mean, certainly there are studies that can, you know, be supportive of those hypotheses, but like you were saying in the video itself, the hypotheses say a little bit more about the person making them than about the actual conclusions.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, yeah, all of the evolutionary psychologists that I came across in my video, they all happen to be, pretty right wing. Um, for some reason, when you also like look at their other viewpoints, when you look at their Twitter profiles and stuff like that. So yeah, it does seem to attract a certain type of person. Yeah.
Yeah. And I liked what you said in the video also about having more women and people of different backgrounds doing this sort of research because
Hmm.
I think when a theory attracts a certain type of researcher, then that's bound to sort of shape what the research looks like.
Yeah, yeah, and also just sort of getting rid of this idea that like somebody can be completely unbiased, because yeah, it's just not possible. Like, everybody has experiences and everybody has viewpoints based on those experiences, and we all have different experiences, and yeah, you can only have some sort certain experiences if you're a woman or if you're a person of
Mhm.
color or if you're LGBT. It's yeah, so yeah, after like sort of learning about all of that, I was like, I never realized how important like representation is, like in all walks of life, like not just science, but like everywhere. You need representation just to get rid of that bias. You just need it.
Yeah. Uh, and for viewers that aren't aware, I also made a video on evolutionary psychology about a year ago, and I was looking back at the comments recently because I was curious. I don't usually check comments except like the day a video posts. And I was surprised that a lot of them were actually saying things along the lines of like, "Oh, you clearly just have a bias against this."
Mm.
And I thought that was interesting because to me, not interacting with the argument of the content of what somebody's saying and rather just accusing them of bias almost sounds like that person maybe has a little bit of a bias. Like, I don't know, what's been your experience with the reception of the video?
Yeah, this is also this idea that like yeah that you can only like speak on a subject if you've like done a full degree in it or like or a master's or doctorate in it, and I don't think that's true. I mean, like I do concede that I haven't like done an actual degree in psychology or anything, but like the I think like the communication of science is also an important part, and I think that's where I can sort of like put my skills to use is like digesting the information of like these clever people and putting it in a way that's accessible. Like it's not me doing the research myself, but I know how to read people's research and like parse it and put it in a you know in a fun presentation. So
Mhm.
I think that's where my skills come in. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think like I really don't like it when people are like, "Oh, you haven't done a doctorate yourself, so you can't talk about it." It's like, well, like people write books all the time. Like psychologists write books all the time, and they're like for the the consumption of people who haven't done psychology degrees. It's like it's not like all of a sudden you can't understand something if you haven't done a doctorate in it. And I
yeah,
think in a way, like I think a lot of people who do like PhDs, like I do really respect like wanting to like I don't know do research to like widen our scope of knowledge, but at the same time, what I'm finding a lot is that it can really give people such a like a tunnel visioned view of like just their subject, and they
mhm,
completely sort of like they tend to sometimes forget about the rest of the world, and it's just like just their subject, and like they forget to put it within the wider context of like science as a whole. So
mhm.
I think like yeah, I think that's also needed. Like people who haven't done PhDs are also needed. Is what
Yeah,
I'm trying to say, I think.
definitely. And it doesn't surprise me if you've been getting those sorts of comments because I know when I was in the process of getting my doctorate, I would get a ton of these comments like, "Oh, we'll see if you even graduate," things like that if they disagree with me. Now that I have it, they say, "Well, like you're 12 years old. What do you know?" So like the goalpost is always moving. If people disagree with you, they're going to find some way to say, "Well, you're not qualified to talk on this,
Mm.
no matter what." But I think it's pretty clear that you have great scientific literacy. Uh,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, like you do a great job of not just looking at the research, but also the strengths and limitations of it, and sort of embedding it within the larger body of literature and seeing where there are contradictions and where things haven't been replicated or debunked. Um, so I'm curious to hear a little bit about how you developed that, and maybe if you have tips for any viewers how they can develop a little bit of scientific literacy too.
Hmm. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know how I did it myself. um, I guess I guess it's just like after reading so many papers, you just sort of you get the hang of like being able to like sort of hone in on the bits that you need to see. Like
Mhm.
with every paper there's going to be a limitations section, which is probably a good idea to read.
Yeah.
And also I think like generally understanding like the limitations of p values and how like p values even like within different fields need to be a different certain percentage of accurate. Like when you look at genome wide association studies, because everything's like so pinpoint and so detailed, like I think they require a p-value of like 0.000000005, like so precise, whereas like psychology it's like oh 0.05 is fine, when in reality it's not at all, is what we're finding.
Mhm.
um but yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just experience, really. It's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like sometimes they'll write their abstract as well in like a really sort of manipulative way that completely
Mm.
like just doesn't sort of mention something that like a massive limitation of the study.
Yeah. Of
Um,
course,
yeah.
why would they?
Sorry.
Why would they include that?
I know. Yeah, like David Buss is an example. I didn't mention this in the video, but he did a big study on the supposed intrinsic hypergamy of women. And he was like, oh, I've looked at 37 cultures. And in his abstract, he's put like, oh, women, uh, women across all of these cultures find they'll put like that they want a man with more resources than them. And he only mentions that in his abstract, but when you actually look into his numbers, like I was like actually looking like quite far into the data, and what he actually doesn't mention is that like the standard deviation of men's answers is actually way wider than women's answers, which means that there were more men like giving extreme answers to that question than were women.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't like put any graphs in his paper whatsoever, probably because it would have distorted what the data was actually showing and what he wanted to conclude in his abstract. But when you actually look into the data, it actually shows that more men were like on the extreme end of like, I don't care how much a woman earns at all, which suggests that there's more men out there with very heavy toxic masculinity in the sense that they believe that they should be the ones providing for the women. Like there's more men saying that strongly than there are women saying, I need a man who earns more than me. So,
Mm-hmm.
but David Buss, he never talks about that sort of toxic masculinity of I have to be providing for my woman. He never talks about that. He only sort of talks about how women generally are looking for a man who earns more. And then he's like, oh, but it's nothing to do with the patriarchy. It's nothing to do with the patriarchy. And like, and he's like, oh yeah, but people say it's to do with the patriarchy, but they can never explain what the patriarchy is. And he really dances around that question about the patriarchy. Like he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even understand that it means, you know, men earn more than women in every country around the world, everywhere, and men have more political power than women. But it's like he doesn't understand that, and he thinks that he thinks that this trend exists because women have been breeding men
Wow.
to be earners throughout history. It's just such a weird, convoluted way of looking at things. But
Yeah.
yeah.
There was one guy on TikTok who I think studies psychology from an evolutionary standpoint that I do kind of like, and he pointed out that men are hypergamous too, in the sense that they want a partner who's more attractive than them. And so
Hmm.
it's so often in like these red pill manosphere corners of the internet that they just kind of forget the other half of the equation. It's like, oh, women are hypergamous because they want a man who's more financially well off than them, but they don't talk about how men also want a woman who is more attractive than them,
But they
or
also say women want men who are more attractive than them as well. So it still comes back to hating women in the end.
yeah, yeah. That's It's so interesting how, just by excluding part of the research or twisting it in from a certain angle, it can completely change the information that you're giving people. And there was also a meta-analysis that came out recently, like past few years, that showed that although men and women say they prefer these things, they don't actually go for partners who have those traits, who are more attractive or
Yeah.
more off. Have you looked at that one?
I've not looked at no, but that is generally a thing that I've been learning is that like surveys is just such a bad way of getting data, like sort of unbiased data, because it's so easy just to like sway how people answer just with like the way that you ask a question or the sample that you choose or yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easy to see in real life that the things people say they want to go for in a partner are not always the things that they go for. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, some of these self-reports kind of up for debate how helpful they actually are.
I mean, you see that with like hypergamy is the biggest example of that. Like because culturally we still believe that men should be providing for a family. Like if you just sort of interview someone on the street, or if you like one of these manosphere peoples that goes up to like a drunk woman on a night out and goes like, what are you looking for in a man? Like obviously she's gonna say half pissed, he needs to be a millionaire. Like But that's just like, it's like such a sort of like, I don't know, immediate reaction to like the cultural stereotypes that we've grown up with. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you look at the actual data of what people actually do, it doesn't follow that trend. Like, hypergamy happens less and less because, surprise surprise, women are now earning more and they don't need to marry up as more. That's what the data is showing. And like, people like Jordan Peterson will even like, he will even like admit that that is happening, that it's happening less in developed countries, but he'll still say, every time he mentions that, he still says, but you still can't get rid of that innate hypergamous nature in women. It's like, you haven't got any proof for that, Jordan. Like, you've got no proof, but he just says it like he's, I don't know, really clever and he knows everything, so people believe him.
Yeah. Yeah. Classic Jorp.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many of those like drunk street interviews also don't show the cuts of women saying very reasonable
Yeah,
non-hypergamous things. I'm sure those don't really make it because they're not as flashy.
exactly. Yeah, it needs to be sort of short and snappy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Now that you mention it, I am curious also about your thoughts on this like trad wife, divine femininity trend that we've been seeing online and how evolutionary psychology has been sort of co-opted for that movement as well.
Mm, yeah, it's I don't know. I don't mind the trad wife thing as long as they're sort of, as long as they're not saying that, this is how women are supposed to be. Like, I'm all up for like, having the choice to do that if you want to. But yeah, obviously the manosphere sort of uses these women to be like, well, they're brave enough to go against the feminist narrative that's tricking women into believing that they should be getting educations and jobs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think they're sort of giving them a lot of ammunition, and I think, I mean, that plays into their hands. A lot of them, a lot of these trad wife influencers, because they just, I don't, doing anything that's sort of controversial in a way, sort of, well, it'll get you views and it'll get you money, won't it? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. The part that kind of concerns me is when they talk about how femininity is by definition uh, like being more passive, like not doing productive things, just kind of vibing, romanticizing life, living in the moment, which like
Mm.
that sounds wonderful. I love to do all of that as well. But I kind of struggle with framing that as being innately feminine because then that kind of implies that all the productivity that society accomplishes is due to men, and if you're a woman that does that, you're in your masculine energy and then you're out of alignment with yourself and that's not healthy for you. So that's the part that I kind of struggle with.
Yeah, I've seen that sort of trend come up on TikTok. I don't really go on TikTok much, but I've seen people on YouTube talk about this TikTok trend of like, you're in your masculine energy if you're doing this, or you're in your feminine energy if you're doing that. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, these are
Yeah.
just, I don't know, these are just personality traits, and I don't know, it's not masculine or feminine. It's just like, it's something that you want to do. It's not like, why does everything have to be so gendered? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean they seem like archetypes almost. Like I think archetypes can be helpful, but I don't understand why they have to be assigned to a gender, kind of like what you're saying.
Mm, yeah.
Going back to how you go into doing all of this research, I'm curious about like your process. Obviously, you took your time to make this and make it really fleshed out and very long. How much did you spend on it, like on an average week, and like how did you go about it? Was there a certain like order to how you approached it, or just kind of like gathering more and more information until you felt like you had like a narrative to tell?
Mm. Yeah, I never really go in with much of a plan with these things. It just sort of ends up how it ends up. I'd say like in total, maybe it was about 5 or 6 months, because I did have a bit of a break in the middle. So basically, like, it has been a year since my last video, but that was because I was working on something else, which I'm now going to go back to working on.
That's
Um,
exciting.
it's just another project which actually sort of ties into the Evo Psych stuff a lot, because it's actually about the clitoris
Mm.
and the history of the clitoris and like women's sexuality, and how that's sort of been, how the sort of mystery of the clitoris has been sort of used to, like, I don't know, the pseudoscience around, a lot of pseudoscience around that.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm going to go back to working on that now. But I think the Evo Psych has really helped me. I don't know, sort of contextualize a lot of stuff around that actually. But anyway, yeah. And then I was working on that, and then I was like, okay, I want to get a video out for Christmas. So I sort of kind of stopped working on it. I was like, okay, I'll like bash this video out for Christmas on Evo Psych. Um, but then my cat passed away, and I was like,
Oh, so sorry.
yeah, it was awful. And then and then like, yeah, so then I sort of took a bit of a break from it, like over Christmas, and then I came back. I only really started working again in like February, because I was just felt really ill all of January. I think I was just like putting a lot of stress on myself, and it like sort of, I don't know, manifested in like with me feeling like really sick as
Mhm.
well, like because I was putting so much pressure on myself to like get this video out, and but I was just like, yeah, I don't know, I was really stressed out, so only really started on it again in February properly.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, this one sort of like the research process around this one, because I had such a big break in the middle of it, it was like quite a lot different um from any other one I'd done. I normally start out with like a sort of, it's called a Miro board. I don't know if you've heard of Miro, but it's like this software where you can sort of put it's like a big sort of mind map, digital mind map, where you can like put
Mhm.
like links and stuff to articles, and you can, you know, write on it and draw things on it or whatever. So I'll start out with like just letting myself, just letting my own curiosity like go down whatever rabbit hole I think, and then but like keeping a note of everything I do on this like Miro board. Um, so I can keep track of like all of the rabbit holes that I've been down. And then like once that is sufficiently like big enough, then I'll just sort of like try and put all of those like links and articles and notes that I've made into a sort of like structure in a Google Doc, and it just ends up being a really, really long document, about like 80 pages long,
Mhm.
of just like notes, like thoughts that I've had, and sources and stuff like that. And then from there, I start writing the script, but I still like, even after I've started writing the script, I'll still end up like finding more rabbit holes to go down
Mhm.
while I'm writing the script, because I'll sort of like think of something else that I need to, or I realize I haven't like explained something very well, so I have to go back and like look into something a little bit more. And there's still some stuff that I didn't put into the video that I, because the original video ended up being like 4 hours long. And I was like, maybe 4 hours, like, can I do an H bomber guy? Can I? And it ended up being nearly an H bomber guy. But no, it was yeah, it, I ended up cutting out like 30 to 40 minutes of it in the end.
Mhm.
Yeah, but there was like loads of extra bits, like loads of extra little rabbit holes that I went down, which I've put on my Patreon now. But yeah, it was just like so, I don't know, so interesting, all of it, that I just wanted to put it all in. But
Yeah.
I don't know, I have to kind of stop myself sometimes and be like, don't, yeah.
Yeah, you could go on forever going down rabbit
Mm.
holes, but it sounds like you do have some order to all of it. I imagine it'd be impossible to not have some sort of structure for yourself. I imagine you would feel very like brain scrambly, like trying to tie all these loose ends together.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have like a sort of schedule where I'm like, now I'm working and now I'm not. I just sort of like, yeah, it wouldn't ever work, because like I just get lost doing things sometimes, and I just really get in the zone of doing something, and I'll stay up till like 4 a.m. doing it, and then the next day I'm like, I can't do anything. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Probably not like the best sort of role model for like structured work life balance.
Do you feel like you kind of rush yourself to get through it because it's such a big project? And I mean, because these go so
Hmm.
viral, like I imagine that would be very motivating to like get to the finish line and sort of push yourself past your limits.
Yeah, every video I've ever done, like towards the end, I've like really sort of pushed myself to try and get it done. I get really stressed out because I also think that everything I do is going to take way less time than it actually does. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll be done finishing editing this section like within the next day, and then I'll realize that it took me like a week to just to like do that small bit.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I do get a bit stressed out because I just like it's so hard to tell how long everything's going to take, and some concepts like take so long to get your head around as well, like the the whole sort of like genetic inheritance thing, and like where we are at the minute with genetic inheritance, and how we're currently understanding that it works, and how that's different from how evolutionary psychologists think it works. So interesting, but at the same time it was like so like difficult to get my head around, and to like try and put it on a page that would like communicate it to other people
Mm-hmm.
in an accessible way, like especially like the section where I talk about the sort of variants and heritable traits, and how biology is sort of like designed to create variants, which I think is really interesting, and all the stuff about the brain as well, and how the brain uses emotions to do like way more things than we think. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything we do involves emotions. And like the way the brain actually works, I think is far more interesting than the pseudo-scientific way that these people are saying it works. Like they're
Yeah.
very stuck in this sort of like era of that, there's like a bit in the middle of the brain which is like the lizard brain, and then there's all of the human bits were built on top of it, and everything's so like in different sections. But actually, like the more we learn about the brain and MRI scans, the more we realize that like pretty much like loads of different parts of the brain are involved in so many different like tasks and stuff, which I find like fascinating. um and that's actually way more fascinating than saying that this part of the brain does this and this part of the brain does that. So yeah.
Yeah. I think there's some specialization there, but I agree, like, they are all interconnected and they all do have a role in different functions than what they're sort of known for.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you know Lisa Feldman Barrett? Have you read much of her
mm-mm.
stuff? No. um I ended up reading like quite a lot of her blog posts. She writes a lot about like emotions and the brain, and I feel like she's the only sort of neuroscientist out there that's actually sort of talking about the brain in like in an actual evidence-based way. um I do want to read her book. I read a few of her blog posts, but I do actually want to read a book because she actually seems pretty legit. Like she was the person who first debunked Paul Ekman, the
Mm.
guy, the body language guy. But now
Yeah.
she's like she goes on podcasts sometimes. She's gone on some problematic podcasts as well. Like she's been on Lex Fridman, but like yeah, but no, I think like she's pretty much the only sort of like neuroscientist influencer out there that's actually sort of talking about like the brain in the way that the current scientific literature is saying it works. So
Yeah. I'll have to check
yeah,
her out.
yeah.
Yeah, I know there have been a lot of neuroscientists in the media lately.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah.
um, I was curious to get your thoughts a little bit more on the naturalistic fallacy, for viewers that aren't familiar. The naturalistic fallacy basically says that you can't draw conclusions based on what's natural, that that's the way things should be. And one thing that I brought up in my video was I don't really see how useful evolutionary psychology is if we can't really draw prescriptive conclusions based on those theories. And then when I was looking at the comments, a lot of them were saying things like, "Well, it's descriptive, not prescriptive," and science is science, so it needs to be amoral. We can't be considering the ramifications of applying it to actual humans. And so I was curious what you thought about that, and what your thoughts are on whether the naturalistic fallacy can be sort of circumvented in evolutionary psychology, or whether it really deters the usefulness of the field.
Hmm. Um. Yeah, I do. I do think it's. Yeah, I think it's. I think it. I think it permeates evolutionary psychology a lot. The naturalistic fallacy, like they will say a lot, like, "Oh, if you've got problems in your life, then it's because you're trying to live in a way that doesn't come naturally to you." Um. They will say that a lot, but like, um, I don't know. That's a difficult question to answer. But
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
asking because I'm also like, I'm not sure. Like when I read that comment, I was like, well, I guess, yeah, that's a good point, that like science is science. And someone compared it to like studying like the physics concepts that created the nuclear bomb. Um, you know, that's also kind of up for debate, though, whether that was ethical in and of itself. Um,
Mm.
and so it's hard because I feel like, no, you shouldn't go into science with like morality or like a specific ideology in mind, because I do think that can kind of mess with the collection of data, but also there should be some sense of responsibility for how that science is going to end up being used by people. And I think we're seeing a lot in the manosphere the way evolutionary psychology is sort of misused, and how
Mm.
people justify these stereotypes, and how, you know, things have to be this way, like men should be the providers, women should be in their feminine. And so yeah, it's complicated. I don't know either. I was just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I did do a bit of reading on that kind of stuff. Like there was a article that the journal Nature wrote on like how we should sort of approach um these issues, and it caused a lot of controversy. Um and one of the psychologists that I was writing about, Dr. Corey Clark, she wrote a whole paper that was like signed by loads of other psychologists that was like, we completely disagree with nature doing this whole sort of like woke wokeness in science thing. But like when I read what nature was actually saying that we should do, they were saying was we should be careful of the language that we use in articles. So like for example, if you're saying don't like don't say the opposite sex, say like the other sex, or like say, or don't, or if you're talking about gender and sex, make sure you say the right word for gender or sex. Like that's all they were saying. They were very much sort of saying you need to be very precise with your language, because people will take articles, they will take studies, and they will try and sort of twist them in whatever way they can to make whatever point they want to make. So, and I think language is a really important part of that. Like people don't understand like how important language is when you're trying to communicate a very complex subject to people. They think words just mean things and that's it. But that's not true. Like all words actually have like emotional connections, and you can really, really sort of sway how an article is perceived just by the wording that you use. And I think that was definitely what nature was trying to get at. But like these right wing evolutionary psychologists were like, oh, you're just trying to pander to people who don't want to believe that there's differences between men and women, kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't what they were trying to say. But yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read that article, but I remember in your video, I thought it was mind blowing when you were referencing some of Paul Ekman's things that he's written in the past, because he's still cited by so many people. Like even when I'm doing research for like YouTube videos, like Paul Ekman, David Buss, they're constantly being cited. And then when you look at some of their older work and some of the language used in it, it's like, oof, like you really got some biases going on here, and now you get to feel like the science supports them.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, especially just something that psychology is still very much affected by, because because psychology is so affected by like culture as well, and like and culture changes so fast. Like people don't realize how quickly culture changes, and like the fact that you can get such racist language from a study that was only written, you know, like 40 years ago is wild. And like these people that are sort of complaining about nature, saying we should, you know, like be careful about the language you use in articles. Like people are complaining about that now, but like they would look at those articles that were written 40 years ago and be like, bloody hell, that's so racist.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
On the topic of psychology and kind of how hard it is to pin down and research, do you think that that's always going to be an issue with soft sciences, or do you feel like there is a way to make the research more easily replicated and make it easier to trust? Because I know even for me, like when I'm doing research for videos, there's so much contradiction, and I'm sure it's like that in other fields as well, maybe even the like hard sciences. um, but it feels like when you're studying human behavior, it really is so hard to grasp and to put your finger on. um, so yeah, do you feel like that's always going to be an issue, or are there certain things that researchers can do to avoid falling into those pitfalls?
Mm, yeah, I think some of the proposed solutions to, like, say, the replication crisis, I think they could work pretty well. Not that they've been really tried, like, you know, in the field properly, like widespread yet, but I think there's some potential to to like, I think we should be making replication as like part of the process. Or like if a study hasn't been replicated yet, maybe there should be a big notice at the top saying nobody's replicated this or something like that. I don't know. Um, but yeah, like when I was looking into the replication crisis, I did also see that I think it was like biomed studies are also like barely replicable. Like, and you'd think that they were more sort of rigorous. Like that's more of a hard science, isn't it? Like biomed, but like I think it was something ridiculous. Like they could only replicate like 20% of their findings as well.
Well,
So I mean, clearly it's not only going on in psychology, but I think the proposed solutions could work. It's just that basic, like the whole sort of system of publishing basically needs to be overhauled, and there needs to be incentives put in place that basically will incentivize people to do very accurate research rather than just the aim of getting published. I think that's just, you know,
mhm.
the main thing, isn't it, really? So
Yeah.
yeah.
And until then, I almost feel like people should be taking research with a grain of salt and also considering qualitative information, whether that be anecdotal experiences or qualitative research. And that might sound counterintuitive, you know, taking research with a grain of salt to listen to more anecdotal experiences. But to me, it feels like it makes sense because there are a lot of quantitative studies that just don't sound real. You know, like there was this one study I'm thinking of that um, said that people with narcissistic personality disorder don't actually have low self-esteem underneath their defenses because they responded a certain way to like an implicit bias test. And when I heard this, like as a clinician at the time, I completely disagreed because it completely contradicted everything I'd seen like working clinically with people. Um, And I almost feel like sometimes qualitative research should be like the foundation upon which to do more quantitative research because like you ask people first, like, how is
Mm.
your experience, or like why do you do the things you do, and then you sort of get more granular with it. But otherwise
But
if
is
you
your
just
experience but is your experience sort of like restricted to the kind of people who come to you for help?
yeah, it is.
Mm.
and also just people in my personal life, like observing
Mm.
them and their behavior and their psychology. But
Yeah.
obviously, that's, with a level of bias.
Mm. Yeah. It must be like, I don't know. Do you feel like psychology is still in its infancy, pretty much as a
Yeah, for
field?
sure. Like it feels, even being in it, it feels like we're just scratching the surface of what we're gonna know in like decades or centuries.
Yeah. Did you know about the like Francesca Gino and Dan Ariely and all the fraud that had been going on? No. It's like, well, I don't know. I feel like it's such a lucrative field that like behavioral scientists, they will do like whatever they can to like say that they've got a finding so they can write a whole book on it and do corporate consultation. Like it's so like you can make so much money out of saying that you found a very sort of like specific thing in human psychology that's universal.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas from what I've sort of read, I don't think anything is universal at
Yeah,
all. But it's so profitable to say that it is. So I
yeah,
think that's the big contradiction. Yeah.
yeah. And that's why I feel like until we have better research, people should take research not as gospel, but like as part of information, getting us closer to whatever the objective truth is, but impossible to completely see accurately.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was I going to say? I forget. Maybe it'll come back to me. But one of the last things I wanted to ask about was the songs and just the skits that you have in your videos. I loved the Timothy Chalamet song at the very end. That was so funny. How long does it take you to do those? And like, do you feel like it's very laborious to make these videos also very entertaining on top of educational?
Um, I'd say what takes me the longest is certainly the research and like absorbing information and trying to find ways to present it. That definitely takes the longest because I guess every time I'm making a video, I'm delving into an entire new sort of like world, and I'm trying to sort of understand it. So it does take a while. To be honest, the music is I've been doing that for much longer. It comes quite naturally to me to make a song and to make a video for it. So I mean like to make the song at the end, it was probably like four days work to like make the tune and to like make the video and edit
Well,
that.
yeah, that's pretty fast.
So I do that pretty fast, but yeah, it's definitely the research that is takes me the longest, I think. And then also, I'd say second is like the editing. The editing takes ages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, thirdly, the script writing, and then lastly is writing the music. That's the quickest bit, but it's also like the funnest bit for me. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I'd like be able to get through such vast amounts of work if I didn't get to have a bit of fun at the end. So
Yeah. I think what's great about what you do is I almost think of you as like an investigative journalist, but with like a very modern form of media because young people these days I feel like are more likely to watch a YouTube video than to read a piece of investigative journalism. Um, and so I really respect how much you're able to bring like levity to your videos as well. And I know for me, like that's something I kind of struggle with because like I do have like a more funny side, but then as soon as the camera turns on, it's like, okay, professional. And it's like, it's so hard to combine the two. So,
Hmm.
great job with that. I did remember what I wanted to say. So I was recently reading this book that's on longevity. So not a soft science. This is like a well-known, well-respected, like I think biologist, definitely like a hard scientist. Um, and there were a lot of like spidey senses going up for me when I was reading his book, and a lot of things that I was like, like this doesn't sound like what anybody else says. And then I looked into it and found that based on his research, he created some sort of supplement to sell to people that he made like billions of dollars off of. And then obviously he wrote the book as well. And so yeah, going along with like what you were saying about how it's really easy to like do research, say this really outlandish claim, and then really heavily monetize it. That
Mm.
clearly is also an issue in other sciences as well.
Yeah, I do find that side of stuff quite fascinating as well. Like people like Brian Johnson, that like that billionaire who's trying to live forever. And he has his own sort of like little team of doctors that supposedly are doing science on him, but like I think people need to realize that that is just not how science is done. I think that's the main thing. Like he is an experiment, sure, but like they have a sample size of one. You're not really getting any usable results out of what he's doing. He's just a very rich man with lots of doctors around him who he is paying to try and make him live as long as possible. And I don't think any of them really know what they're doing, but it's fun to watch anyway. So.
Yeah, yeah, and this guy also like his findings also weren't replicate or replicatable. They did try to replicate them, and also like somebody called him out on Twitter for like having a misleading result. So like everything that we've been talking about, like people just need to like take even scientific studies with a grain of salt and like use common sense and critical thinking and like just be careful what you believe out there.
Mm. Absolutely.
Um, any last thoughts before we finish up today?
Um, I don't think so. Can't think of anything. No.
Yeah, well, thank you again so much for coming on today. Don't forget to check out Munecat's links in the description and a pinned comment. And yeah, hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.